Sarah Marrinan here, and I want to get you started thinking about offer terms. Whether you're a buyer or a seller, and sometimes you're both, a real estate purchase agreement, a contract, isn't just about the price and the closing date. It's about a lot of terms and conditions as well. So when we're talking about price, the price is going to be the agreed upon sale price of the property. But there are a lot of things that affect that price, like does the buyer need the seller to help contribute to their closing costs or to help them buy points? If the buyer needs the seller to help them fund their escrow account or pay their lender fees, that actually directly affects the net price that they're giving the seller. So it's very important for the seller to realize contributing to a buyer's costs are going to affect the price they're getting for the home. When it comes to price, the other thing that affects that is appraisal. So if the buyer is getting a loan, then there is usually an appraisal that is ordered through the lender. The appraiser is going to be a third party that is basically having their name drawn from a hat that comes out and gives their independent value of the property. Now, if what the buyer and seller agree to as the price is more or less than what the appraiser puts on the home, that can open up a new can of worms. In a hot market, let's just say it's less, because that's more often what happens. If the buyer and seller agree to a purchase price of $525,000, we'll say, and the appraiser comes out and says, really, we've studied the market and we think with what's sold and kind of where we're at in the market, we think this home is only worth $490,000. Well, now you have a $35,000 gap between what you agreed on and what amount the buyer's lender can allow as the mortgageable price of the home. So somebody's going to have to come up with that difference, and there's going to be a bit of negotiation involved in who's going to cover that. So that is definitely something you want to discuss with your agent in advance of getting into a purchase agreement. You're also going to want to talk about the terms. The terms are like, on what day will we close this purchase agreement? Does the seller need a little extra time to move out after closing, or does the buyer want to rent it back to the seller for a little bit while they finish out the lease at an apartment? These terms are negotiable. There's also going to be conditions, like this agreement is on the condition that the home passes inspection. And then part of the terms is who pays for those inspections, and if it doesn't pass inspection, what happens? Are there repairs? Can the buyer back out? What happens? What are the conditions and terms around the inspection that happens? Sometimes in a hot market, there is no inspection. Buyers waive their right to inspection. I would never recommend that, but they waive their right to having an inspection on the home. You're going to want to talk about, in terms, assessments and taxes and those things. Who's going to pay the real estate taxes for that year? If there is an assessment for road work that's recently been done or coming up in front of the house, is the buyer or the seller going to be responsible for paying that assessment? If you live in an association or have a well or septic system, are there going to be terms about that? And is it going to be a condition? Is the buyer going to say, I need a passing septic report? Or is the county going to tell the seller, you need to provide a passing septic sewer inspection in order to sell the property? If it's an association, the buyer has, by state statute, the right to review the association. And on that, there are usually fees for the seller to obtain the documents that they need to obtain to give the buyer for their statutory review period. So there's some negotiation around that. Usually, there's not much negotiation around title, except that most buyers expect sellers to provide clear and marketable title, that it's free of any other liens or encumbrances or additional ownership. If the buyer of the property has another home to sell, that could be a condition. They could say, we can follow through on this purchase on the condition that we sell our home. And then there might be some terms that the home has to be sold by a certain date. So you really work out that negotiation. Uh, Sewer inspections and city required inspections are a big deal now. There are a lot more cities than even 5 years ago requiring what we call point of sale inspections. Now, most of the time, these have to be ordered by the seller and usually paid by the seller because they're ordered in advance of an offer on the property. But if there are repairs that are required, many of those repairs can be negotiated as well. The buyer or the seller, who's going to do municipality or city required repairs on the property. Once you get through all of those terms and you feel like you've got a great deal and you've got the buyer's financing really locked in, that they're approved for the loan and not just qualified for the loan, some other discussions come into play, like did the seller fill out a full disclosure? And if they did, are the buyer and seller comfortable enough with that to agree to pursuing arbitration should there be a disagreement after closing? So you'll want to review what arbitration is and if that's something that you want included or declined with your purchase agreement. If there are any other things that come up as far as repairs from the buyer's lender, because that can happen as well. They get that report back from the appraiser and the appraiser took a ton of pictures, and in one of the pictures the lender sees something they don't like, and since they are often the larger equitable shareholder in the property because they're the bigger part of the mortgage, they can say, hey, we want. In one case, I had a shed that they thought was too dilapidated and beyond repair. They wanted it removed from the property prior to closing. They thought it was not safe. And so the seller had to either remove the shed or allow the buyer to remove the shed with some additional written agreement. So there's a lot of things that go into why people like cash offers, right? Because then there's no lender and appraiser tapping on their deal. Now, because people with cash know that that eliminates a lot of headaches for a seller, a lot of times their price isn't as high. It's all leverage and negotiation, right? So really, when it comes time to consider what the best offer is, whether you're the buyer or the seller, you need a strong advisor that's going to really help you get through lines and lines and lines of opportunities and options when it comes to putting together a purchase agreement. If you've got questions, I didn't go through everything here. It's too short of a video for that. But if you've got questions about what terms go into a purchase agreement, it's really a good idea to talk about them before you rush into the agreement. And really, you don't do this every day like I do, so it's going to be hard to remember everything. But the idea is get a feeling for a lot of the terms that you're looking for with your agent ahead of time, so that if you do have to compete against other buyers as a buyer, or if you do have multiple offers as a seller, your agent can kind of weed them apart and say, these are the ones that have the terms you most wanted when we discussed terms that were appealing to you. So I can be reached at 651-964-0289. Check out my email and website and all my contact information around here, brokerage, those great things. And I'd love to work with you on your next move.